I was standing in my father-in-law's office, the mahogany desk between us gleaming under the afternoon light, when Robert slid a folder across to me and said the words that made my blood run cold. "Sign this, and we'll finally make you a real part of this family." I looked down at the buyout offer, $50 million for my shares. Shares he didn't know I knew were worth closer to $658 million. And in that moment, I realized my wife's family had been playing a game I didn't even know I was in. My name is Daniel, and for 15 years, I've lived what most people would call a charmed life. I married Claire when we were both 28. She was brilliant, kind, and came from money. The kind of money that builds wings on hospital buildings and has galas named after the family. Her father, Robert Hastings, owned Hastings Industrial Solutions, a manufacturing empire that supplied components to half the Fortune 500. I came from a different world. My dad was a machinist, my mom worked in a school cafeteria. I put myself through state college on scholarships and loans, then spent 5 years grinding in corporate finance before moving into private equity. By the time I met Claire at a charity auction in 2009, I'd made my first million and was hungry for more. Robert never quite warmed to me. At our engagement dinner, he'd patted my shoulder and said, "Good for you, son, marrying up." Claire had laughed it off. I'd smiled. But the words stuck like a splinter under my skin, small but impossible to ignore. Still, we built a good life together. We had 2 kids, Emma, now 13, and Lucas, 10. Claire worked part-time as a consultant, more for fulfillment than money. We lived in a beautiful home in Westchester, took vacations in Tuscany, sent the kids to private school. From the outside, we were the picture-perfect family that everyone envied. But there was always this subtle current beneath family gatherings, like a riptide you couldn't see until you were already caught in it. Robert's comments about my little investments, said with a smile that never reached his eyes. Claire's mother, Patricia, asking if I was keeping busy in that tone that suggested I must have too much free time on my hands. Claire's brother, Marcus, who'd inherited his father's arrogance but none of his business sense, treating me like I was hired help at their summer house rather than family. They saw me as the guy who married their daughter, the charity case who got lucky, the outsider who would always be grateful just to be at the table. What they didn't see was the deal I'd made 16 years ago. What they couldn't imagine was that the man they looked down on actually held the keys to everything they thought was theirs alone. It started with a phone call on a Tuesday morning in March. I was in my home office, reviewing quarterly reports from my portfolio companies, when Robert called. His voice had that particular quality he used when he wanted something. Friendly, but with an edge of command underneath. "Daniel, can you come by the office this afternoon? There's something I'd like to discuss. Family matter." That phrase, family matter, always meant something involving money or business, never actual family issues like birthdays or holidays. Those were Patricia's domain. When Robert said family matter, he meant the business of running an empire. I agreed, curious about what could possibly involve me. I wasn't part of the company as far as they knew. I had my own investments, my own world. When I arrived at Hastings Industrial's headquarters in Stamford that afternoon, Robert was alone in his corner office. 72 years old, silver-haired, still sharp as a knife despite his age. The office was exactly what you'd expect. Leather chairs, expensive art, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Sound. He gestured to the chair across from him with the casual authority of a man who'd spent 50 years giving orders and expecting them to be followed. "I'll get straight to it," he said, skipping any pretense of small talk. "I'm restructuring the company. Marcus is taking over as CEO next year when I retire. We're consolidating ownership within the immediate family, keeping things clean, you understand." I nodded slowly, not sure where this was going. "Okay. I know you've done well for yourself," Robert continued, his tone almost patronizing, like he was complimenting a child's finger painting. "Made some smart investments over the years. But you're not blood, Daniel. You understand that, right? This company has been in the Hastings family for 3 generations, and it needs to stay that way. Then he slid the folder across the desk with the casual confidence of someone who believed he held all the power in the room. Inside was a buyout offer for shares I'd purchased through a shell company back in 2008. Back then, Hastings Industrial was privately held but struggling badly during the financial crisis. The economy was collapsing, credit markets were frozen, and companies like Robert's were bleeding cash with no way to stop it. Robert had quietly sought outside investors to avoid a hostile takeover or worse, bankruptcy. Through a connection in private equity, someone who knew I had capital and knew Robert needed it, I'd bought in anonymously through a limited partnership structure that kept my name completely off the paperwork. I'd bought 47% of the company for $180 million. It was money I'd made from a previous exit and leveraged investments, and it was the single biggest bet I'd ever made. Robert had needed capital desperately and sold those shares at a significant discount just to keep the doors open and avoid losing everything his father and grandfather had built. Now, 16 years later, with the company not just surviving but thriving, valued at $1.4 billion, Robert was offering me $50 million to walk away. $50 million for shares that were worth $658 million at current valuation. "This is more than fair," Robert said, leaning back in his chair with the satisfaction of someone who thought he was being generous. "You'll make a nice profit on whatever you invested back then. No fuss, no lawyers, no complications. Just sign and we keep this quiet. No need to upset Claire with complicated business talk. You know how she gets with numbers." I stared at the number on the page. 50 million? It would have been life-changing money for most people, but for shares worth 13 times that amount, it was insulting. And the way he said it, the casual dismissal, the assumption that I wouldn't know better, that I'd be so grateful for the scraps that I wouldn't ask questions, it made something cold settle in my chest. He thought I didn't know what I owned. He thought I was stupid, or desperate, or both. I looked up at him, keeping my face neutral. "This is unexpected. I need time to review it with my advisors." Robert's expression tightened just slightly, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "It's a generous offer, Daniel. Very generous. Don't overthink it. Sometimes the smart move is the simple move." I stood, tucking the folder under my arm. "I'll be in touch." As I left his office and walked through the building my money had helped save, I felt the weight of what had just happened settling on my shoulders. Robert Hastings, the man who never quite thought I was good enough for his daughter, had just tried to cheat me out of more than $500 million, and he'd done it with a smile. I didn't sign. I told Robert I needed time to review it with my advisors, and I left his office with the folder and drove home in silence, my mind racing to implications and possibilities and the sheer audacity of what had just happened. That night, Claire asked how the meeting went. She was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, completely relaxed. "So what did Dad want? You were there for a while." I kept it vague, not ready to open that particular door yet. "Your dad's restructuring the company, talking about succession plans, Marcus taking over, that sort of thing." She smiled, pleased. "Finally, Marcus has been waiting for this forever. He'll be good at it, I think. He's learned a lot from Dad." I watched her sip her wine, completely unaware of the storm that was brewing, and I realized in that moment that she didn't know either. About my ownership, about the shares, about the fact that I'd essentially saved her father's company 16 years ago. Robert had kept it from everyone, buried it in paperwork and shell companies and legal structures designed to obscure the truth. To him, I was an anonymous investor he could manipulate, someone he could lowball and intimidate because I had no connection to the family, no leverage, no way to fight back. Except I did. I just hadn't used it yet. Over the next 2 weeks, the pressure mounted in ways both subtle and obvious. Marcus called me on a Thursday afternoon, his voice bright and entitled in that way he had, like the world was a party he'd been invited to and everyone else was just there to serve drinks. "Hey, Daniel, Dad mentioned you're helping us clean up some old investor stuff. Really appreciate you being a team player about this. Family first, right?" He didn't ask. He didn't wonder if I might have concerns or questions. He just assumed I would fall in line, grateful to be included, happy to help the family that had graciously allowed me to marry into their world. It took everything in me to keep my voice level. "Still reviewing things, Marcus. It's complicated." Sure. Just don't drag it out too long, okay? Dad wants to wrap this up before the end of Q2. At Sunday dinner at Robert's estate, one of those sprawling properties in Greenwich with more rooms than people, Patricia asked about our financial planning over dessert. It was code, of course. Code for, "Are you secure enough without our help? Do you need money? Should we be worried about you?" Claire squeezed my hand under the table, a gesture of solidarity, oblivious to the subtext swirling around us like smoke. Then Robert invited me to lunch the following Tuesday, just us. At his club, the kind of place with leather chairs worn smooth by generations of wealthy men, portraits of dead founders on the walls, and a wine list that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. We sat by a window overlooking the golf course, and Robert ordered for both of us without asking what I wanted. "I need an answer, Daniel," he said over steak that probably cost $200 a plate. "I'm trying to be respectful here. I'm trying to handle this the right way. But if you drag this out, if you make this difficult, I'll have to take other measures. You understand that, right?" I set down my fork, meeting his eyes. "Other measures?" He leaned back in his chair, swirling his scotch, and his expression hardened in a way I'd never quite seen before. "You're a smart guy. You've been around. You know how these things work. Restructurings can get complicated, messy, legal battles, forensic accountants, depositions. I'd hate for Claire and the kids to get caught in the middle of something unpleasant. Emma's at that age where she notices things, you know? Kids hear their parents arguing, they see the stress, and it affects them. I wouldn't want that for my grandchildren." It wasn't quite a threat. Not technically, but it was close enough that the message was clear. Sign, or I'll make your life hell, and your family will suffer for it. I picked up my water glass, taking a slow sip to buy myself time to control my anger. "I'll think about it." "Don't think too long." Robert smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. Time has a way of making things more complicated than they need to be. That night, after Claire and the kids were asleep, I went to my home office and pulled the original share purchase documents from the safe I'd kept hidden behind a bookshelf. I hadn't looked at them in years, hadn't needed to. The investment had been solid, the structure was sound, and I'd trusted that it would pay off eventually. The partnership was structured through a trust I'd created, completely legal, entirely separate from my marriage assets. It was airtight. Claire had never asked about my business dealings in depth because she trusted me, and I'd always kept my work life private, separate from our family life. Now, sitting at my desk at 2 in the morning, I understood why Robert was pushing so hard. If I held 47% and his family held the remaining 53%, I had massive leverage. I could block major decisions. I could demand board seats. I could force transparency in a company that had operated like a private kingdom for generations. I could audit their books, question their decisions, and make their lives very, very difficult if I chose to. Or I could sell at fair value and walk away with generational wealth that would set up my kids and their kids for life. But the way Robert had approached this, the lowball offer that insulted my intelligence, the veiled threats against my family, the casual assumption that I was too stupid or too grateful or too weak to know better. It stuck in my throat like a stone I couldn't swallow. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about respect. It was about being treated like I mattered, like I was more than just the guy who'd married into the right family. I hired a lawyer, not a family friend, not someone Patricia or Robert might know, but someone completely outside their circle, someone discreet. His name was Alan Reeves, a specialist in corporate governance and shareholder disputes who came highly recommended by people I trusted. I met him at his office in Manhattan on a rainy Thursday morning, bringing every document I had. Alan was in his 50s, gray around the temples, with the calm demeanor of someone who'd seen every corporate trick in the book and couldn't be shocked anymore. He reviewed everything methodically: the original purchase agreement, the current company valuation, Robert's restructuring plan, the buyout offer. It took him 3 hours, and he barely spoke during that time except to ask clarifying questions. Finally, he sat back in his chair and shook his head slowly. "This is extraordinary. He's trying to buy you out for pennies on the dollar, less than 8% of what your shares are actually worth. And legally, as a major shareholder, he has to know you're entitled to fair value if he's restructuring. This isn't just a bad offer, Daniel. This is potentially fraudulent. Can he force me out? Not without a fight, and not without fair compensation. If he tries to force you out at this price, you could sue for breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, potentially even conspiracy if he's hiding information from other shareholders." "But Daniel," Alan leaned forward, his expression serious, "I have to ask, why does your wife not know about this? Why have you kept this secret for 16 years? It was a fair question, one I'd been asking myself. I'd kept the investment private for 2 reasons, and I explained them both to Alan. First, when I'd made the investment, Claire and I were newlyweds, still figuring out how to merge our lives. I didn't want her to think I was trying to buy my way into her family, playing games with her father's company, or somehow using our relationship for business advantage. I wanted our marriage to be separate from business, clean and uncomplicated. Second, the purchase was made during a really difficult time for Robert. He'd been desperate, facing the potential loss of everything his family had built. I hadn't wanted to humiliate him by making it a family issue, by having his daughter know that her new husband had essentially bailed out her father. I'd thought I was being kind, giving him privacy and dignity. But 16 years of silence had created something else, a gap. A secret that had grown in the darkness until it was bigger than I'd ever intended. And now it was about to explode into all our lives. "I need to tell her," I said quietly. Alan nodded, his expression sympathetic. "Before this goes any further, yes, you absolutely do. Because once we respond to Robert's offer, once we push back, this is going to become very messy very quickly. Your wife needs to know the truth before her father starts spinning his version of events." I went home that night with a knot in my stomach that tightened with every mile. Claire was in the kitchen when I got there, helping Lucas with a science project about volcanoes. Emma was upstairs on a video call with friends, her laughter floating down through the house. Everything was normal, peaceful, the life we'd built together, undisturbed and whole. And I was about to drop a bomb into the middle of it. "Can we talk?" I asked Claire after the kids went to bed, after the dishes were done and the house had settled into its nighttime quiet. She looked up from her book, her reading glasses perched on her nose. "Of course. Everything okay? You seem stressed." I sat down across from her, and I told her everything. The shares, the purchase 16 years ago, the current valuation, Robert's insulting offer, the thinly veiled threats, the fact that I'd essentially saved her father's company and he'd never known it was me. And now he was trying to cheat me out of hundreds of millions of dollars. Every word felt like pulling teeth, but I forced them out one by one, watching her face for reactions. She listened in complete silence, her expression unreadable. She didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions, just absorbed every word like she was filing it away for later analysis. When I finished, she carefully marked her place in her book, set it aside, and stood up. "You own almost half of my father's company." "Yes." "For 16 years, since we'd barely been married 2 years." "Yes." She walked to the window, arms crossed, staring out at our backyard where the kids' swing sets sat in the moonlight. "And you never told me, not once. Not when we bought this house, not when we had the kids, not at any family dinner or holiday or moment in our entire marriage. Did you think to mention that you're secretly one of the largest shareholders in my family's company?" "I didn't want it to be a thing," I said quietly, hearing how weak it sounded even as I said it. "Your dad needed help back then. The company was in real trouble. I had the capital available. It was a business decision, a good investment. I didn't want you or him to feel like I was leveraging our relationship, like I was using you to get access to the family business." "But now it is a thing," she said, turning to face me. Her eyes were hard, glittering with something I couldn't quite read. Anger, maybe, or betrayal, or just shock. "My father is trying to cheat you. My father, who I love, who I respect, is trying to steal from you. And you've known about this for weeks, and you're just telling me now?" "I didn't know how—" "I need time to think," she interrupted. I need to process this, all of it." She walked past me and headed upstairs. A few minutes later, I heard the guest room door close with a quiet click that somehow felt louder than if she'd slammed it. I sat alone in the living room until 3 in the morning, staring at nothing, wondering if I'd just destroyed my marriage to save a business deal, wondering if the cost of finally standing up to Robert was going to be losing the only thing that really mattered, my family. The next morning, Claire came down to breakfast already dressed, her face composed in that way she had when she'd made a decision. The kids were still asleep. It was Saturday, and they'd sleep until noon if we let them. She poured herself coffee and sat across from me at the kitchen table. "I love my father," she said without preamble. "I love him, and I've looked up to him my entire life. But what he's doing is wrong. It's not just wrong, it's cruel, and it's short-sighted and stupid, and it's going to damage this family in ways he clearly hasn't thought through." Relief washed over me like a wave. "Claire, I don't want to hurt him." "You won't have to," she interrupted, holding up her hand. "He's hurting himself. He and Marcus both. They think they can push you around because you're not real family, because you didn't grow up with money, because you don't have the Hastings name. But you are real family. You're my husband. You're the father of their grandchildren. And more than that, you've been more honest with that company than either of them have been willing to be. You saved it when it was failing, and you did it quietly, without asking for recognition or gratitude. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's something to be proud of." Over the next month, we worked with Alan to formulate a plan. Not revenge. I wasn't interested in destroying Robert or the company. Not a public fight that would drag the family name through the courts and the media. Just clarity. Just fairness. Just standing up for what was right in a way that was dignified and legal and unassailable. First, Alan sent a formal letter to Robert's legal team declining the buyout offer and requesting a full audit of company financials, as was my right as a major shareholder. The letter was polite but firm, leaving no room for misinterpretation. We weren't asking, we were informing. There's a difference, and lawyers know it. Second, we prepared a counteroffer. I would sell half my shares, 23.5%, back to the family at fair market value, roughly $329 million. That would give them majority control with more than 75% ownership, but I would retain a significant stake and a board seat with veto power over major decisions like asset sales, mergers, or executive compensation packages above a certain threshold. It was fair. It gave them what they wanted, control, while ensuring I was treated with respect and properly compensated. Third, Claire spoke to her mother. That conversation was private. She asked me not to be there, but I know from what she told me later that Patricia didn't take it well. She blamed me for driving a wedge into the family, for causing problems where there hadn't been problems before. She said I was being greedy, that I was taking advantage of a generous offer, that I was showing my true colors after all these years. The fact that her husband had tried to cheat me out of more than $500 million apparently didn't register as a problem in her worldview. Marcus called me 2 days after Alan sent the letter, and he was furious in a way I'd never heard before. "You think you can extort us? You think you can hold our family company hostage? What kind of person does that?" I took a breath, keeping my voice calm and level. "I'm offering you control of your own company at a fair price, Marcus. That's not extortion. That's business. I'm asking for exactly what my shares are worth, not a penny more. If your dad had offered me fair value in the first place, we wouldn't be having this conversation. You've been lying to us for 16 years. I haven't lied to anyone. I made a legitimate investment through proper legal channels. Your dad knew he was selling shares to outside investors. He just didn't know one of them was me. And honestly, if he'd treated me like family instead of like someone to take advantage of, I probably would have told him years ago. Your dad never should have let you in, never should have let you marry Claire." Those words hung in the air for a moment, crystallizing everything I'd always suspected about how they saw me. Your dad made a smart decision in 2008. He saved the company. He brought in capital when he needed it. I'm just asking for what's fair now. That's all this is. The line went dead. Marcus had hung up on me, which felt about right. He'd never been one for conversations that didn't go his way. Robert didn't call. Instead, he hired his own legal team, the expensive kind, the kind you bring in when you're preparing for war. For 3 weeks, there was silence, tense, cold silence that filled every corner of my life. Claire kept in touch with her mother through text messages and occasional brief phone calls, but family dinners stopped. The invitations dried up. Emma asked one night at dinner why we weren't seeing Grandpa anymore, and her voice had this confused, hurt quality that made my chest ache. I told her we were working through some grown-up business stuff, which was true, but inadequate. Lucas, younger and less aware of the undercurrents, just shrugged and asked if we could get ice cream instead. Kids have a way of cutting through the complicated parts of life to what really matters. Then, on a Thursday afternoon while I was in a meeting with a portfolio company, Alan called. I stepped out to take it, and his voice had a note of something I couldn't quite identify. Satisfaction, maybe, or relief. They've agreed to negotiate. Robert wants to meet. All parties present, including Claire if she's willing. When? Tomorrow, 2 o'clock, my office. I called Claire, and she answered on the first ring like she'd been waiting. They want to meet. Good, she said, simply. I'll be there. We met in a neutral conference room in Alan's Manhattan office, one of those sterile spaces with a long table and uncomfortable chairs and nothing on the walls to distract from the business at hand. Robert, Marcus, and their lawyers sat on one side. Me, Claire, and Alan sat on the other. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The family physically divided, the battle lines literally drawn across a conference table. Robert looked older than I'd ever seen him, tired. There were new lines around his eyes, and his usual commanding presence seemed diminished somehow. He looked at Claire first, and something in his expression cracked, just for a moment, before he pulled the mask back in place. "I underestimated you," he said, finally, looking at me. "I'll admit that. I didn't think you'd push back. I thought wrong." "I'm not pushing back," I said carefully, keeping my voice even. "I'm offering fairness. There's a difference." Marcus scoffed from his seat, but Robert held up a hand to silence him. "Let him finish." I laid out the offer again, clearly and simply. They buy half my shares at market value, $329 million. I keep the rest, take a board seat, and we move forward as partners. The family maintains control with 76.5% ownership. I get fair compensation and a voice in major decisions, Everyone wins. Robert was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the table in a rhythm I recognized. He did it when he was thinking hard about something. Then he said, "You could take us to court. You could drag this out for years, cost us millions in legal fees and public embarrassment. The press would love it. Family feud over billion-dollar company. It would be ugly." I agreed, but I don't want to. I don't want to destroy the company or humiliate you or tear this family apart. I want what's fair, and I want my kids to still have a relationship with their grandfather. I want Emma and Lucas to grow up knowing their family, not wondering why we stopped having holidays together. That landed. Robert's jaw tightened, and I saw something shift in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or regret. He glanced at Claire, who met his gaze evenly, not backing down, not apologizing for standing with her husband. "You knew about this?" he asked Claire, his voice softer than I expected. "Not until recently. But yes, I know now, and I support my husband. What Daniel did 16 years ago saved our company, Dad. He could have told everyone. He could have used it as leverage, or bragged about it, or made you feel small. But he didn't. He kept it private out of respect for you. And now you're treating him like he's trying to steal from you when all he wants is what's fair." Patricia, sitting beside Robert, looked away. She couldn't meet Claire's eyes, and I realized she probably knew the truth too. Knew that Robert had tried to cheat me, knew it was indefensible, but couldn't bring herself to go against her husband. After another long silence that felt like it stretched for hours, Robert nodded slowly. "We'll agree to your terms, but I want a clause. If you ever decide to sell your remaining shares, we have first right of refusal at market value. The family gets the chance to buy you out before you can sell to outsiders." I glanced at Alan, who gave a slight nod. It was a reasonable request, actually. It protected the family's control and gave them options without costing me anything. "Done," I said. We shook hands across the table. It wasn't warm. There was no embrace, no sudden moment of reconciliation like you see in movies, but it was final. It was done. The deal closed 6 weeks later, after lawyers drafted and redrafted every document, after accountants verified valuations, after every detail was examined and re-examined. The family paid $329 million for half my stake, money that hit my accounts in a wire transfer that my bank called to verify was legitimate because the amount was so large. I retained 23.5% of Hastings Industrial, worth roughly $329 million, and took a board seat starting the following quarter. Marcus became CEO as planned, but now with oversight, with checks and balances, with someone on the board who wouldn't just rubber stamp every decision. A year has passed since then, and I'm sitting in my office looking back on everything that happened with a clarity I didn't have when I was in the middle of it. Thanksgiving last month was awkward but civil. We went to Robert and Patricia's house like we always had, and the kids ran around with their cousins while the adults made careful small talk. Robert and I don't talk much. Our conversations are polite but surface level, the way you might talk to a business acquaintance you don't particularly like but have to work with. But he's kind to Emma and Lucas. He plays with them, listens to their stories about school, gives them thoughtful gifts. Whatever his feelings about me, he doesn't take it out on them, and I'm grateful for that. Patricia still keeps her distance. She's cordial when we're in the same room, but doesn't call, doesn't reach out to Claire the way she used to. The relationship there might never fully recover, and I've made peace with that. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt exactly as they were. Marcus and I have a professional relationship and nothing more. We sit across from each other at board meetings, we review financial statements and discuss strategic decisions. He's careful now, more thoughtful, knowing that I can block the kind of careless moves he might have made before. I've vetoed 2 proposals so far. One was a vanity acquisition that would have wasted money. The other was an executive compensation package that was wildly out of line with industry standards. Both times Marcus was angry, but couldn't argue with my logic. That's the thing about having actual business experience. You can't just dismiss someone's objections when they're backed by facts. Claire and I are stronger now than we were before all of this happened. The secret was hard for her, harder than I'd anticipated. We went to therapy together to work through the trust issues, to talk about why I'd kept it hidden and what that meant for our marriage. It wasn't easy. There were sessions where she cried, where I had to confront my own reasons for keeping her in the dark, where we both had to decide if we could move forward together. But ultimately, she understood. She understood why I'd kept it private, and she respected that when the moment came, I fought for what was fair without destroying her family. "You could have been vindictive," she told me one night a few months ago. "You could have demanded more, exposed Dad publicly, made them growl. But you didn't. You just wanted fairness. That's who you are, and that's why I love you." I used a portion of the buyout, $20 million, to set up education trusts for Emma and Lucas, structured so they'll have access to funds for college, graduate school, and starting their adult lives without the pressure of debt or the corruption of too much money too young. Another $10 million went to fund a scholarship program for first-generation college students pursuing careers in manufacturing and industrial fields. It's run through a foundation I established, and it feels right, honoring where I came from while building something lasting that will help kids like I was, kids who just need a chance and some financial support to change their lives. The rest is invested conservatively, growing steadily, ensuring that my family will be taken care of no matter what happens. I still work. I like working, like the challenge of finding good investments and building companies, but I don't have to. That's a freedom I never had before, and it changes how you see the world. The other night, Claire and I were sitting on our back porch after the kids had gone to bed, drinking wine and watching the stars. She asked me if I regretted keeping the shares a secret for so long, if I would do it differently if I could go back. I thought about it, really thought about it. "I regret the distance it created between us," I said finally. "I regret that you felt blindsided, that there was this huge part of my financial life you didn't know about. But I don't regret the investment itself. Your dad needed help. He was desperate and scared and facing the loss of everything his family had built. I gave him that help. I did it quietly and privately, and I expected nothing in return. And when he tried to take advantage of that, when he tried to cheat me because he thought I was too stupid or too grateful to know better, I stood up for myself. I think that's the right way to handle it." She smiled and squeezed my hand. "You did more than that. You taught Emma and Lucas something important, that you can be kind and still have a backbone, that fairness matters, that family is important, but so is self-respect. They watched you go through this, even though we tried to shield them from it. They saw you stand up to their grandfather without being cruel. That's a lesson that'll stay with them." I think about Robert's words in that first meeting, the ones that started all of this. "Sign this and we'll finally make you a real part of this family." As if money or blood or a signature on paper were the only measures of belonging. As if everything I'd done for 15 years, being a good husband to his daughter, a good father to his grandchildren, a good investor who helped save his company, counted for nothing because I didn't have the right last name or the right pedigree. But family isn't about who signs the checks or whose name is on the building or whose portrait hangs in the corporate headquarters. It's about who shows up, who stays when things get hard, who fights fair even when they could fight dirty, who chooses dignity over revenge, fairness over vindication. And I've been part of this family longer than Robert wanted to admit. 16 years of marriage, 13 years of being a father to his grandchildren, 16 years of being a silent partner in his company's success. I was there all along. I just made him see it. If you enjoyed this real-life story, please like, comment, and subscribe for more calm, emotional stories about family, betrayal, and finding your dignity when it matters most. Let me know your thoughts below. Would you have handled it differently? Have you ever had to stand up to family when it cost you something? I read every comment, and I'd love to hear your perspective.